16th, 2019. Roll call, please.
All right, there we go. Chair Andrew Carr,
Here.
Mayor Tim Knapp,
Here.
Kirsten Ackerval, Paul Bunn, Arthur Park,
Here.
Charlotte Lehan, Susie Stevens,
Here.
William Amadon,
Here.
Daphne LaGarza,
Here.
Ben West. Thank you.
Can we all stand for Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next agenda item, the public hearing and requesting citizen input. I call to order the Wilsonville Budget Committee public hearing on the City of Wilsonville's fiscal year 2019-2020 proposed budget. Ladies and gentlemen, the Budget Committee will take public testimony tonight at this public hearing. If you wish to testify, please complete a speaker card on the table at the entrance to this room and give it to the recording secretary, Paula. When you are called to testify, come to the front of the room and sit at the microphone facing the committee. Begin your testimony by stating, "For the record, my name is," and fill in your name. After stating your name, either state your address or, if for privacy reasons you do not wish to publicly state your address, state that your address is written on the speaker card submitted for the record. Please note that your testimony card is public record, and therefore your name and address are part of the public record and available for public inspection. I request from those providing testimony not to repeat testimony that has already been given to the committee, simply indicating you agree with the previous speaker's testimony is sufficient. Is there anyone wishing to testify? Mr. Park, or Mr. Steiger.
Name is Alan Steiger. I reside at 7054 Southwest Cedar Point Drive here in Wilsonville. And I'd just like to take this time to congratulate Kathy, the finance staff, and all the other folks involved in putting together this budget document. It's a lot of work, and you guys see the results, but you don't see the work going into it. They deserve a round of applause for their efforts.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Steiger. Yeah.
What, Keith?
Anyone else? No speaker cards? Thank you. The public hearing on the City of Wilsonville's fiscal year 2019-2020 proposed budget is now closed. And now we turn it over to finance staff for the program presentations. Take it away, Kathy and Keith.
Okay, so I just wanted to circle back. We have two questions we're going to answer, and then we're going to have a little bit of discussion on the credit card issue that we talked about last time as well. During the last budget meeting, we showed we listed all the revenues. So here's that slide again, and the one we overlooked last time was the other revenue, and I think Councilor Stevens had asked about it. So what's in that $700,000 is the municipal court fines of $320,000 and projecting about 2,900 violations next year. It also includes the $174,000 annual lease payment from the Willamette Water Supply Program. You may remember we were targeted for $174,000 for the next 10 years, and then there'll be a $15.4 million balloon payment in that 11th year, and that's for the pipe to the water treatment plant that they're building. Other amounts in there are the cable PEG access fee that's on the cable, related to the cable, that's $70,000. And when we go over the program level expenditures for the IS department, you'll see that being spent on certain items. Additionally, what's in that are donations, $52,000 from the library alone, and additional amounts in the community center. And then there's rental income. We rent out a house in the water fund for some property, and then we also have some cell tower leases in our sewer treatment plant. So that kind of makes up that $700,000. The other question we had was kind of related to the quarterly financial report that gets sent to all of you in the Budget Committee and is also posted on our website, listing as of March 31st this couple months ago, we had $145 million in our investment cash portfolio. Something to keep in mind that I don't think was articulated last month or last meeting, that includes the urban renewal funding too, and there's about $36 million pooled into that investment portfolio. So the budgeted ending fund balance for the city is basically a formula on estimated beginning fund balance plus all estimated anticipated revenues less anticipated expenses. So kind of how they're correlated. Just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. It included the urban renewal in that quarterly financial report you guys receive.
Thank you.
So the other issue that we had talked about last meeting was related to the credit card fees and the expenditures you're seeing, and Kathy was going to touch base on that a little bit.
Okay, so we did do a survey and had 11 people respond. We had 8 cities and 3 water districts. What we all have in common is that we all accept credit card payments in person. We all accept them on our websites, and we all offer the ability to charge monthly on their credit card for a recurring payment. We have a couple people who have phone service. We have some people who don't allow their staff to take it over the phone. But for the most part, on the big 3 major ways of handling credit cards, we're all doing the same thing. And then we asked them, so do you charge for the use of credit cards? And as you can see, we're not that far off from everybody else. Nobody at this point in time is charging for credit card fees. One other thing that we did ask them is if they put a cap on a credit card. And this is something relatively new. There was a lawsuit against Visa and MasterCard, and part of that came out is that, yes, we can now put a cap on it. We do have one customer who has a monthly bill between $20,000 and $30,000, and every month calls in and pays with a credit card. One thing that we also have seen in the past is we have developers who will come in and pay $70,000 on a credit card to buy their building permits and SDCs. So it's out there, it's something that we haven't looked at, but now might be a time to take a look at that. And I just thought was kind of interesting. Cricket is our utility billing expert, and she participates in our Eden user group. And this is the utility billing system that we're currently using. So they're always asking us for surveys, so we sent one out to them. We had 2 responses from California, 3 from Washington, and 1 from Michigan, Utah, and Ohio. So kind of an interesting look across the country. Once again, for the most part, everybody is accepting them in person. On the websites, one person doesn't do the recurring monthly payment. The 2 cities in the middle there have a little different system. The city of Newark in Ohio and the city of Rio Vista in California, they actually have a hosted website. And that's how our municipal court works. And the website host requires a $3 fee every time a credit card is used. And for the city of Newark, they pass that $3 fee on to the customer. They don't receive it, it goes directly to the host. The city of Rio Vista actually absorbs that $3 fee in addition to the credit card charges. But once again, at this time, people just aren't charging credit card fees. We do see when we're looking about the cap that, looking at the bigger picture, there are quite a few more people using that. So I certainly think that that would be a good place to start, making that cap come up with some reasonable amount. So that's what we came up with.
Mr. Amidon.
I appreciate the additional information. It's very helpful to me. I think a cap is something definitely would make sense. The second question is, what about property taxes? Can citizens pay their property taxes with a credit card?
You can, the property taxes, of course, are submitted to either Clackamas County or Washington County, excuse me, my California's sticking out of me. But they do charge a fee. I believe it's a 3% fee.
Thanks again, that was great.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. I'm a little slow on the uptake here. Would you go back a slide to your second slide, please? Back one more. There we go. I was trying to get my head around this. Number one includes urban renewal, and it's 36 million, which is half of the part that does not include urban renewal under the heading there.
Well, the total amount of the financial report was 145 million, of which $36 million is attributed to urban renewal. So that leaves $109 million that are related to city funds. And the difference is that the $72.5 million is an estimated fund balance at 6/30/2020, and the $105 million is as of 3/31/19. So we're talking actuals recently to an estimate a year and a half from now.
Just seems like 30 million is quite a ways to be off, even with the estimate. I mean,
Well, you know, it all depends on how we finish out the year end. If we have a big, robust CIP season, we'll be spending a lot more of that money in the next 3 months. You know, at the end of this week, we're paying out, you know, $5 million in debt service payments. We also have the $2 million going out for our electric buses. So this is always a kind of a moving target, and we track our cash flow carefully to make sure that we do have the funds available when needed.
and we don't have to pay a kicker if we miss it by 2%.
No,
Oh, okay, yeah.
I would strongly vote against that.
All right, thank you.
So with that, I guess we'll continue our march through the department level, or the program level budgets. And this is the totality of them really make up what our operating budget is. So last week, we went through the public works departments, the transit and the fleet departments. This week, we're venturing into the policy and admin, community development, parks and recreation, library, law enforcement, and municipal court. So the first up is policy in administration, which is the internal kind of service fund departments of the city, and they include administration, finance, the IS, legal, and HR. I think first off, though, if Andrea Villagrana, our human resources manager, has a short presentation that she'd like to.
So last year during the budget deliberations, there was a lot of questions about workforce and what does our workforce look like. So I asked Ms. Villagrana to work with Ms. Troja to put together a presentation so that you can kind of understand what our workforce looks like.
Good evening. As Keith said, my name is Andrea Villagrana. I'm the HR manager here for the city. And last presentation or last meeting, Keith went over quite a bit of where does the money go, where does the money come from. So I thought I'd talk today about where the people go, where the people come from, as far as our workforce is concerned. So when we're looking at our workforce as a whole throughout the nation, we are looking at a very low unemployment rate right now, what most human resources professionals consider a 0% unemployment rate because it's at 3.6%. When I think about how that compares to when I came here in 2009, it was at 9% at the time, so it's changed quite a bit over the last 10 years. Each day, we have about 10,000 people retiring. So if we think about that in our current workforce, about 37% of our workforce nationwide is 50 plus years old. An estimated 1 in 3 workers will voluntarily leave their jobs in 2020, and this is up from, I believe the statistic was 8 million that left their jobs in 2017. So there are quite a few people who are looking for other jobs voluntarily, who are just looking for a different change or perhaps a move up, a promotion. However, if you think about the cost of these departures, it's 33% of your salary. So if you're thinking of someone leaving, those costs would be soft costs, such as the recruitment costs that we spend. Also, if you think about the cost of overtime, if somebody is filling in for them, it's quite a bit of the salary if you think about it. So where our employees go. So in HR, we've been tracking our turnover over the last 5 years. It's a metric that is something that a lot of HR departments track, but I also found that not all HR departments track it as not delicately, but as in detail as we do. So our overall turnover is 22%, but that includes our seasonal employees. So about half of that is seasonal or temporary positions. And then about 1 in 10 of those who are departing the organization are departing for other local government organizations, and that's over the last 5 years. About 20% of our turnover right now is attributed to our retirements. So we have quite a few employees who are eligible for retirement right now. So currently today, about 13% of our workforce at the city could retire. That number goes up to 30% over the next 5 years. And in the next 10 years, about 45% of our workforce just here at the city is eligible to retire. So that's a lot of turnover, but it's more, we like to call it attrition because it's natural turnover. So how do we get the people here? So this is what, though this isn't the sole focus of the Human Resources Department, we do spend a lot of time recruiting right now. We, on average, are recruiting or have 38 recruitments per year. I think I just opened my 47th recruitment, so we're a little above average this year. We review over 1,400 applications, conduct 235 interviews, spend about 176 hours in interviews, and that's just the HR department. If we think about the way we conduct interviews here, we do a lot of panel interviews, which means that we have other employees who are on that interview panel as well. So it's a lot of time that we're spending in interviews trying to find that right person. And we hire about 49 people per year. So for each hire, the recruitment process takes about 12 hours just from the HR department. So if I think about that from just my perspective, that's time looking at applications, writing a job description, setting up interviews, fielding phone calls and emails, which we get a lot of, so it's quite a bit of time. So this fiscal year already, we've spent over 500 hours on recruitments, and it's split up there. It's a little hard to read with the white lettering down there, but the largest chunk of time is actually under miscellaneous, which is writing a job description, writing the ads, also ensuring that we're getting back to applicants and answering any questions that they might have about the position or also the recruitment process. And that is all I have. Did you have any questions?
I have one.
Councilor Stevens?
Thanks. So for probably the department head positions, at least, you recruit out of the state. Is the vast majority of the people that you're hiring from locally and for like the Parks and Rec staff and the Public Works staff, which I imagine is pretty large, this administration, those are all sort of local Portland metro region hires, or do you bring them from everywhere?
We actually recruit from all around, and oftentimes we're not necessarily posting recruitments in other states, but other people are very interested in living in the Pacific Northwest, and so they'll be searching for jobs in the Portland area. And really, we focus on who's the best fit for the position.
Regardless of where they're
coming from.
Okay.
A lot of people will get on city websites and they will ask for the email notification if they're looking specifically for an area or city. So those notifications will go out based on what their interests are.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Knapp?
Thank you. The one additional piece that would be interesting to me, maybe not to everyone, is how many of our former Wilsonville employees are now employed in other governmental bodies around the region, because I suspect there's quite a few, and I hear anecdotes about how well-versed and professional many of those people are, I'm afraid we're becoming a target for people to recruit from because we have so many capable people. And I don't know how far afield those go, but I know there's quite a few.
So I don't have the exact number, but we do have about 1 in 10 over the last 5 years who have left. So about 10% are leaving for another local government organization of those who are leaving. It's not actually a large number. We keep quite a few employees here. That's why we have such a high percentage of employees who are eligible for retirement. It's because they really enjoy working here and they enjoy the work environment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll kind of go through the departments in the policy and administration area. The first up is the city managers, the administration department. Current year budget of 1.7 million in 5 FTE. This is the familiar matrix we've done in the past. You'll see the baseline changes here being driven by mainly moving the code enforcement officer from planning to administration, as well as an increase in the Metro Enhancement Grant Fund awards and corresponding expenses. This is the program funded through Metro for the communities affected by the garbage transfers facility. So we're anticipating additional revenue and corresponding additional expenses related to the Metro Enhancement Grant. So, and then in this department, there is an ad package for a 0.5 FTE temporary records support technician, and this is a half-time position for a 2-year duration related to records. And then if you have any particular questions on any of these slides as I'm going through them, I guess just let me know, or we could always go back to.
Andrew? Of course.
Councilor Stevens.
Thank you. So I may need Andrea again. The code compliance officer, that's a relatively new position, like 3-4 years old. It used to be handled by planning, and then they would just, I think, shift those responsibilities.
Yeah, well, it was kind of handled mostly by planning because there was a lot of sign code enforcement, but there's a lot of other things that the position needs to do. So we did add, I think it was it 3 years ago? 2 years ago?
I think we just hired the position last fiscal year.
Right, well, we had somebody else in the position before that, and so we
now we
got
have
back
both.
together and talked about how can we reorganize this, where should it be? So now, I would say that the person that's doing it now is very successful and doing a lot of other things that we're not getting done as well, so.
I agree with that. I've met Holt a couple times out in the community, and
He's very active. He's
terrific.
proactive on signs now, which I know is a big deal to the council and it's a big deal to me. So he's doing regular sweeps. He's also doing outreach to businesses that are in violation of sign code. So he's doing direct knock and talks. He's working on neighborhood dispute kind of stuff. Any kind of code violation, he's the first person that we call. He works with other folks in other departments to make sure that we're doing it the right way. But yeah, it's a lot more robust than what we used to do.
yeah, rather than just having to be like a offshoot of
Yes.
whoever there's. And I just want to say that he's doing a fantastic job. His rapport with
Yeah.
citizens,
He's a gentle giant.
gentle giant, because that's not an easy job.
It's not, and he's got the perfect
People do not wanna
personality
see him
and
coming
skill
in.
set to deal with those kinds of
Yeah,
sticky
it's
issues.
very unique, and he's doing a great job. So,
I will pass that along, thank you.
yeah, sure. So then it wasn't planning, it's in administration, that just seems like a better fit for that.
Yeah,
that
because it's so much of what that job does touches so many different departments. It's more like an internal service kind of function.
Okay.
And it just made sense to have it be in the general fund. Most cities, it's in the police department.
Oh,
Just
it
because
is
you're dealing with
enforcement.
abandoned vehicles and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and it tends to be a little, we want to take a softer approach. We're
Yeah,
all about
excellent.
compliance, we're not trying to beat people over the head, so
Right.
I need somebody that communicates at a high level and gets where we need to be without, showing up with a badge and a
Yeah.
blue shirt.
Taking
No
a picture.
offense, Rob. Exactly, yeah.
okay.
I know Rob appreciates Holt too, because he's dealing with some things
Yeah,
that
take
police
some of that
department.
load
used to
off,
have.
right, for those minor infractions
Yeah.
that can be handled with a softer touch, like you say.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on the temporary records, folks. I don't know if Budget Committee Council may recall that we invested quite a bit of money in Laserfiche about 4 years ago, 4 years ago. It all kinds of blends together into one budget. And I think it was around 300,000, and we just haven't had the staff capacity to get these records where they need to be electronically. So I had Beth Wolf in our IT department, along with Kim Valise in my office, put together a work plan. And out of that, we determined that we need these temporary positions to start getting these things. We're running out of storage here at City Hall, so we really need to make an effort over the next 2 years to get these things digitized so we can get rid of them. We don't have to maintain them.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those things that with the other workload, it tends to, because it's not vitally important, it doesn't have deadline, it can keep getting pushed off to the side. And kind of like the code enforcement, you just sort of handle it off to the side, but it really becomes really important at some
Right.
point in time. So the priority is there. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Mr. Amidon.
So Keith, just out of curiosity, when we're talking about a half-time position, how does that affect PERS and group insurance and all that stuff? Is that person then covered or exempt from those employment benefits?
They potentially, I think the PERS requirements, if I'm not mistaken, is you have to work 600 hours in a calendar year. It's potential they could be already qualified from another agency and they come here to work. So it's possible that they would be PERSable or PERS
I think
covered.
the idea with this is to hire we're looking for some retired people that don't mind mundane, they say same after, hiring 2.25 FTE just to minimize the impacts in terms of benefits.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
To be benefit eligible for the city, you have to be over 0.5.
right.
So,
More than 20 hours a week then?
correct.
Okay.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. Looking back in our budget to the 16-17, we had a position called a Community Outreach Specialist. Can you help us recall, how that position was utilized and how similar duties are being dealt with
Community outreach
today?
specialist, I believe that was Mr. John Gale, his position.
And don't we
I
have
believe-
somebody working?
I'm sorry, it was Angela. So when I hired Angela, she, I think she was half-time or three-quarter time. She had taken the place of Starla before her, who was full-time admin for the previous city manager. So I wasn't sure what I needed, so I hired part-time, and then we figured out what her skill set was, and she was really good at community relations, so I kind of turned her loose on stuff like that.
All right, so those are functions that are now being absorbed somewhere else in administration?
Well, they're being kind of tagged with my current assistant, Ms. Monahan, and also Bill Evans in the Government and Public Affairs Office.
Thank you.
Yep.
So the next department we'll talk about is the Finance Department, and this has a current year budget of $1.6 million in 9.5 FTEs. You'll see a baseline retraction of $17,774, and that's driven mainly by some staff turnover savings, as well as, and you'll see this in a couple departments, the removal of janitorial services. Finance Department splits the cost of they used to split the cost of janitorial services for this City Hall building, with the other half picked up by CD admin, but both those, or all of that function now is handled in the Facilities Department, which we did last time. So we brought the janitorial services in-house for some additional savings. So you see, you have that retraction in the baseline, and then the ad package is for an outside review of how the city is handling our procurements. Currently, the city is very decentralized in the procurement function, and we are proposing with this contract to have our independent audit firm come in and take a look at this and perform kind of an efficiency audit to make sure we're maximizing the efficiency and effectiveness of purchasing, which is really has, grown into really a strategic, or it has been for a long time, a strategic occupation, and that it may benefit the city if we just kind of want to look at overall how we're doing it. So we're going to have our audit firm come in and investigate that for us.
Councilor Stevens?
So just a quick question, and this number just jumped out at me. So on meeting expenses for there's a 224% increase from the budget, and it's a small number in terms of the numbers, but but the percentage just really jumps out. So
that-
were you just way off?
Kind of, if you look, you'll see big credits and big, increases,
Mm-hmm.
and that was our effort of trying to line up what the actual expenses, where they're actually incurring versus where we've been budgeting them.
Oh,
over the
throwing
last-
them into meeting
Yeah, so
expenses
we
as
were
a
actually
catch-all?
putting more money on that and less money somewhere else.
Okay,
So,
okay.
you see that throughout this whole budget.
Okay, oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
IS systems in our GIS department. The current year budget of 1.3 million, and they have 5.5 FTEs. Here you'll see a baseline retraction of $126,000, and that's really driven by the removal of a lot of one-time or annual fluctuations in the case of the computer maintenance contracts to get to that retraction of 126,000. And then they have two ad packages, and they both are related to that PEG money that we receive. And those are for, one's for some storage for high-quality video broadcasting, as well as just some annual capital replacement.
So we're not going to add any employees or staff to help us with that? It'll all be contracted out, or has that been thought through yet?
Well, I don't think maybe we'll have Andy, our IS director, come up and speak to that a little bit.
Hi, so we, Andy Stone, IT Director for the city. We have a RFP out right now for a project manager to help us with that process. And we're looking for somebody that's been, or has experience going through these types of processes. Then we're gonna kind of, each section we anticipate is gonna be a little bit different. So in some cases, we may have to do a little backfilling. We may have to do a little bit of rearranging of job duties and stuff, but we didn't feel like at this point that we need to add FTE.
So the program manager is part of the capital improvement budget for the systems conversion?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Legal department, a current legal budget of $601,000 and 3.7 FTE. The baseline change reflects the department increase of a 0.5 FTE in the current year, which the budget appropriation for half of this which was only appropriated for half the year, basically. So the increase includes a whole year appropriation for next year for that FTE. And that's where you see that 62,000 baseline change. And they do have one ad package, and this is for the case and matter management software system that is designed for legal department to manage their data in a more efficient and effective way. And that's 22,500. And then finally, in the policy and administration is the HR department. And they have a current year budget of $817,000 and 3.6 FTE. The baseline increase of $53,000 includes increases for labor negotiations for both union contracts, which are expiring at the end of next year. And they have some small ad package increases, which include some positional reclasses in the department, as well as a new onboarding-related software to increase the efficiency of onboarding new employees, bringing them up to speed on the rules and regulations and policies of procedures within the department. And the software will allow them to do that with less labor-intensive. They can have the new employees kind of look at the software and work through that rather than hand-holding and doing it at a more intensive labor type of position. So that will be the HR department, and I think that wraps up policy and
Mayor
administration.
Knapp?
Thank you. Again, I'm a little slow here on the follow-through, but I'd like to talk about IT for a moment again. In the different contacts I have and the communications that I receive from different cities across the country occasionally, it's clear that the rate of transition, I guess, in terms of IT functions and the growth in that in many major cities across the country is just really accelerating at a significant rate. And we've had a lot of dialogue in the last couple of years. We're working on the internal systems that we've talked about getting going and whatnot. I guess my question is whether we are paying close attention to the developing technologies that cities are using in many other places, and are we thinking about how to utilize those technologies that we might not currently have in place or may not be everyday things to us at this point. And, you know, I don't have a specific example, but there are a pretty wide variety of things kind of under the heading of big data and how that is assembled and used to increase efficiencies within the city. So that's kind of a lob to you, Andy. The number of different things we could be doing is huge, but my question really goes to, you know, what keeps us looking at those opportunities and planning and thinking about how to identify what really is an opportunity and grab onto it to keep us moving forward and not getting left behind in that whole revolution.
So, yeah, there are a lot of things that are going on out in the world now. We're really concentrating on laying the foundation for a lot of these things. Our fiber program, making sure that we have taking opportunities to get fiber to all of our different facilities, making sure that we have that pipe, that bandwidth to be able to do that. But we're also looking at working with a lot of the other departments. They're out there looking at new technologies. Public Works is looking at AMI, that type of thing, something for automatic meter reading, laying that foundation for some smart city type technologies like the lighting controls for street lights, that type of thing. We try to really look out there and see what's out, what other cities are doing in not only in just in the local area, but also around the country. There's quite a few different things, but a lot of it really, at least so far for us, has been getting that foundation in place so that if we do come across something or there's an initiative that we need to do, we have the infrastructure in place to be able to support that. So it's not as big of a lift if we were to do something new or something like that. We try to make sure that we're proactive on all construction projects, that we're looking at getting pipe in the ground, that type of thing, so that we don't have to, come back later and tear up a street to put a conduit or something like that in. We are paying attention to the other things that are going on, like, the prevalence of 5G and that type of stuff that's coming through. So we're trying to kind of keep an eye on all of that stuff, but really kind of making sure our foundation is strong.
Can I add to that?
Certainly, yeah.
The IT department also has a strategic plan that they actively keep up to date. I know once a year or once a year we get together and we talk about what the needs are going forward. So that's not just a plan that sits on a shelf. It's something that they implement and they take very seriously. And it's a plan that the city council adopted 4 years ago.
3 or 4, yeah.
Everything goes back 3 or 4 years for me. Anything after that, I'm like lost. I don't know. But the point of that whole plan is to make sure that we are staying as cutting edge as possible with all new technology. You don't necessarily always want to be the first one out the gate, especially as a government agency. We tend to be a little more conservative because it's not private capital that we're risking here. It's public funds. So we want to make sure that these things that we try are tried and true, and that we know they're going to work, and that we know, I trust that if a department wants to implement a new software system, that they're talking to IT to make sure they can talk to other software programs that we may be using, so that we're not just spending money on an isolated program that only works for that one department and it can't communicate with other departments. So we have that dialogue on a regular basis every time we get into a budget meeting, and I ask Andy, well, this department wants this, have you talked? And of course they have. So we make sure that we continue to do that.
Yeah, that's important that we continue to do it. And we all know that in 3 or 4 years, technology, moves forward noticeably, and we've got to try to keep up with those plans. I think about things like the question of government transparency and how many records are available to people, how many public information requests do we get? How much of our data is posted online where anybody can go to it without us having to receive and respond to a particular request? You know, are we, I mean, it kind of is those things like Councilor Stevens mentions, nothing's forcing us, so it's easy to put it on a back burner. And yet, as, you know, we go year to year to year, I think we have to try to push forward and not just wait till something demands it, I guess.
Yeah.
We agree.
Mrs. LaGarza.
Thank you. My question is in regards to human resources. I notice it's a relatively lean staff in human resources, and we heard a lot about the recruitment process and kind of what's involved there. There's also, it looks like, some other components like risk management, and I guess my question is, where do we see how is that trending? Do we see it increasing, or do we see any future demands, levels for that?
For risk management?
Yes. Or any of the other aspects of HR.
They of course did ask for more resources this year, but we have to look at everything in terms of how it kind of blows out in the 5-year plan and make sure that we can pay for it for at least 5 years. So that's something we'll have to monitor. They are stretched thin, I will tell you that. They do need some more resources. So we've tried to go as much with software, technology, and then at the last, you know, the last thing you would want to do is add staff, because that's what's going to cost you the most money. So I'm sure they would love to have more resources though. But do you want to address anything with risk management? I think a lot of that's handled through our insurance provider, CCIS, that represents all cities. HR's role in that is just making sure that we're doing everything that we need to do in terms of our insurance provider. So if it comes to employee discipline or something like that, they're of course checking in with folks to make sure that we're handling things the appropriate way. Anything related to like a sidewalk or an injury or something like that, there's forms that every city staff person that interfaces with HR, they know how to fill those out. I wouldn't say that things are going up with risk management. I think it's been pretty steady since I've been here.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Amadon.
I'm going to go back to the IT discussion and thank Andy for your explanation and support what Brian said. In the private sector, it's a little bit different. It's okay to be on the so-called bleeding edge if it generates revenues, et cetera, but in the public sector, I agree. So the adage says, we want to be on the leading edge, not on the bleeding edge. And there's a lot of risk on the bleeding edge.
I would agree.
So I'm very comfortable with your explanation and what Brian added in terms of the public sector city. Thank you.
Okay, so for our next set of slides, we're going to go through our community development, which is our administration and economic development program, our engineering and natural resources program, and planning. And then we'll bring up Dan Carlson, our building inspector, and go through the building fund as well. And we welcome Mr. Chris Namsu.
Good evening, Chairman Carr, members of the Budget Committee. I'm Chris Namsu, the city's Community Development Director, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight to present the fiscal year 1920 budget to you. So I've got a slide with a few talking points, some stats, and a little bit of background. Overall, the department is proposing a status quo budget. We have a couple of significant moves that one of them has already been covered by Kathy and Brian, and that's the moving of the Code Compliance Coordinator. We've retitled that position as well from Code Enforcement Officer to Code Compliance Coordinator. It's a little bit of branding that's going on with that position as well. So the reductions in the Planning Division budget are as a result of moving that position up into city administration. The Natural Resources staff, which is comprised of 2 FTEs, they have been moved from CD administration to engineering because their work programs are much more closely aligned. The stormwater program that they manage is obviously based foundationally on the natural environment. And they also manage capital projects, and they provide inspection services for the city for stormwater facilities as they're being constructed. So about 6 months ago, the change was made to move those 2 FTEs over into engineering to just more closely align their work programs. And over the past 6 months, that has actually worked quite well. Our major activity areas from a development standpoint include Villebois. There's still a tremendous amount of activity happening in Villebois. We've now got Frog Pond West going full speed. We're doing a lot of business retention and a lot of fielding of questions and inquiries in the Coffee Creek industrial area. So we're spending a lot of time from an economic development standpoint, as well as the capital improvement project for Garden Acres Road. So we got a lot of effort going into the Coffee Creek area. And then the capital program overall that you heard at the first budget committee meeting is a quite robust and ambitious program that is also handled out of the community development department. Threw in the stat about how many homes have been approved in Frog Pond West because I sense that there's general interest around that issue. And the Development Review Board has approved 199 homes in Frog Pond West. The capacity there is about 570 total homes. And we've issued just under about, right around 10 building permits so far for single-family homes, 6 of those homes being the homes for the Street of Dreams. And now we're starting to see additional submittals, both in the Morgan Farms development as well as the Frog Pond Meadows project. Planning issued over 319, or they issued 319 permits in calendar year 2018, which was a slight uptick from 2017. And that number includes things like sign permits, tree permits, administrative review, as well as development review board permits. And engineering is seeing a tremendous increase in not only in development, but also the large-scale capital projects. Projects like Fifth to Kinsman, the Beckman Road Dip project, the Memorial Park Pump Station project, and Garden Acres Road are some of these are multi-million-dollar projects, multi-year initiatives that we've been working on for quite some time. So, Community Development Department, again, not adding any staff. We're managing these projects and this workload with the staff that we've got, and it's a very busy team, very robust work program. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Amadon.
So Chris, I'm looking at the 5-year forecast for community development that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes.
My question is, it's almost like a straight line down going through 2024, 25?
About
Yeah,
that
this thing.
here at the end of the presentation,
Okay.
but we can move it up.
No, that's okay, as long as we're going to hit it.
This is actually, if you were to compare it to last fiscal year, is a very similar trajectory, if you will. As you can tell, we have just a slight crossing of the expenses over the revenues. And one of the things that I'm hoping that Dan from the Building Inspection Fund, he has a graph that shows you just how difficult it is to project revenues in these permit bases. It looks like a roller coaster over a number of years. We take a very conservative approach when we're looking at our revenue projections. And this, of course, is a fund that has been on the watch list for a number of years. We watch it every time, every 3 or 4 months we get together and look at things. It's probably time for us to go back and look at, we had a consultant come in and look at our permit review revenues. It's probably time to do that for both this fund and the building inspection fund. But of course, it's always important to remember that every year we look at this independent of what else is going on. And if there's any changes that we need to make to keep on track, those changes is what will be brought to you. So as it currently stands, we do anticipate a slow decline unless we see a big uptick in either the permits or the capital project management fees.
Mayor Knapp.
Same subject. Does this graph reflect the personnel changes that are showing on page 95 for the reducing total personnel services over the last few years? Because I don't really see the expenditures line dipping like the numbers seem to dip.
Well, this is based on a fund basis where these are program basis. So if we go back to what was going to be our first slide here. While overall we've had a number of reorganizations, we're moving, engineers to engineering and the code officer off. Overall, when you compare the 3 programs together to last year, we actually have a small reduction. So the number of employees remain the same throughout that 5 years. They're just in different programs now.
And so the graph was all of them combined?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This is the total community development fund. So that's the engineering, the administration, and the planning department together. Okay? Now we'll go back to the beginning. So here is the community development, the administration program. As I said, it's kind of hard to see what all the changes are made because there's so many. In this one here, we have a baseline change of $344,000. And that's pretty much due to the reorganization of the natural resources to the engineering program. They also, this group also has a large materials and services program, as they use a lot of outside services to help them with the NPDES permit. And if you need to know what that is, I have Chris here to tell you what it is, but we talk about it every budget session. And we also see the reclassification of the janitorial services, once again, of about $18,000. So we end up with a proposed budget of $614,000 and 2 FTEs. So then, of course, you see the exact opposite when we go to look at engineering, because they're increasing because they're receiving the natural resources, the staff members, as well as the additional materials and services for the consultants that they use. In total, we have a baseline change of $443,000 and a proposed budget of $2,169,000 and a total FTE count of 13.5.
So we dropped 113 in the first one and added 99?
It fluctuates from year to year depending on where they're at within
Okay.
the
All right.
permit process. And then when we look at planning, we have a reduction of about 99,000, and that's because of the reorganizing of the compliance officer to admin. We also have a reduction in professional technical services because the grant work that has been completed, so we won't have that on the work schedule next year. So we have a proposed budget of $1,125,000 and a FTE of 7.6. And that's community development. If we have any other questions on, I know there's a lot of moving around, and hopefully we'll get it settled.
Yes, indeed.
Musical chairs, in essence? Yes.
Okay, if we're ready, we'll go on to the building fund, and I'll invite Dan up to help us understand this amazing graph that he's put together.
Roller coaster graph.
Yeah, woo.
All right, good evening, Chair Carr, and good evening, members of the Budget Committee. My name is Dan Carlson. I serve as the city's building official. I did have the pleasure of putting this graph together. I have many others as well, but this seemed to be the one that could tell the story at a glance. Before we really dive into this, though, I want to kind of give some perspective, if I may, with regard to the building permit fund and some of the characteristics of it. I think it kind of helps bring some relevance to this. The building permit fund is supported almost entirely on building permit fees and charges for services like plan reviews. By state law, we operate on what's called a dedicated fund. That means that we cannot take building permit revenues and spend them on new parks equipment or purchasing another new electric bus, even though Dwight would really love that. Building permit fees basically come in at 2 points in time. The first point in time is at the time of permit application. The second point in time is the time of permit issuance. So those are when we collect our permit fees. Building permit fee revenue must support inspection and plan review services over a long duration of time. This could be for projects that range from 3 to 6 months to as many as a couple of years. So with the exception of trades permits, like plumbing and mechanical permits, fees are based on a project's value. That's why you have the valuation curve in front of you. The overall valuation of projects is shown in the graph, showing a visual representation based on, this is a calendar year now, not a fiscal year. Actually, I'm sorry, it is a fiscal year. Revenues are very cyclic and depend on the level of development activity. And so you see this up-down motion there. That level of development activity depends on a lot of factors. Some of those would include the economy, what the economy is doing for interest rates, cost of materials. We've been hearing about that a lot lately, cost of labor, or the inability to find labor, skilled labor in particular, is driving up costs. The availability of cost of land is another factor that impacts overall development costs and feasibility of projects. The competing market conditions, such as incentives that other jurisdictions might offer. So we end up sort of competing against other jurisdictions for certain projects. So those all sort of play into this dynamic in trying to forecast something that is moving all the time. So for expenditures, you'll see on the next slide that the overall proposed building division is a status quo budget. The total budget adjustments that we're looking at are $12,382. So we're keeping things relatively flat. For revenues, the last slide kind of tells the story. Our reserves, which are depicted with the purple dash line, they really peaked with the previous building boom. We saw that come at us and it started way back before 2015, 2016, and that upward trajectory, if we could show you 10 years, it really has peaked in that 10 years now at 16, 17. And then you see a gradual dip in terms of our reserves, and then a steady line of decline for the years out. So our expenditures, which are orange line, rose to meet the demands for service. Mainly this was in adding staff and replacing our electronic permitting system, which we're getting ready to do. Our revenues, which are the blue line, have not increased since 2006 and are frankly not keeping pace. This is a fine balance, as you don't want to increase fees necessarily with a large reserve balance. So you really have to be careful with that. And the orange line being our expenditures and the blue line, really what they need to do is they really need to be closer together. We really try hard to have our revenues and our expenditures just about meeting each other. So in future, that's what we're looking to do as we, potentially if it were a fee increase, we would try to get those two lines together. In addition, you also have to look at the expenditure side and see if there's ways that we can lower our expenditures and somewhere to meet those somewhere in the middle. So I guess the bottom line is unless we receive some significant development activity, we will need to adjust our fees and expenditures before January of 2022 to avoid going below the financial policy minimum, which is the gray line. So we basically have about a 2.5-year period of time until then that we'll be initiating actions to really bring this into balance.
How do you determine these permit rates?
There's a number of ways to do that, or a number of factors that play into that. We do surveys with other jurisdictions to make sure that we're staying, competitive and that we're not overpricing ourselves. There's an annual survey that's done by the Oregon Building Officials Association with 30 or 40 jurisdictions that we will rely on. We'll also do costing, what our costing is internally, and there's other factors that will go into that as well.
Now, having said that we hadn't changed rates since 2006, is that what you said?
Yes, that's correct.
Where do we compare with the jurisdictions around us today?
That's a good question. Without looking at a recent survey, the last one I've seen is 2017. By comparison, I believe Tigard was about $1,000 more for a new home permit. That's taking a 2,500 square foot typical home and pricing out the fee package for that. Woodburn would be, our next neighbor to the south. I believe they are in the realm of $1,000 above us as well. So we're due. We've just made really good use, we've been good stewards, I think, of the resources that we're given, and not gotten ahead of ourselves with fee increases that are unnecessary, particularly when the reserves are very healthy. So.
Councilor Stevens.
Thanks. So I know Villebois was really hot and heavy, and now is kind of tapering off as those last phases get finished. But as Mr. Namsu was saying, Frog Pond's on the horizon, and we have the other two parts of that to do on the other side of Stafford. And then we have Coffee Creek coming on. So even with that kind of development on our really pretty near horizon, we still see this as an issue.
It just really depends. If you look at other years and compare them to this year, they're very similar. This is a very similar curve in what I saw in a former jurisdiction, just because of the nature of the funding source. And development is so hard to predict and when it's going to come in. Just for example, we had a very large, another phase of Villebois that was supposed to come in yet this year. And it's turning out that that's going to probably be pushed out to another year, if at all. So it's really difficult. Another example, in 2017, we had the sum total of one brand new commercial building that was built in Wilsonville, and that was Marion's Carpet. So we went, virtually where we would have 5 or 6 new commercial buildings and the revenue stream that would go with that. And here you go, literally 11 months without a new commercial building.
Okay.
Now, on the upside, for Wilsonville in particular, I've been very impressed in looking over the stats of a 10-year period. The new, or the remodels and additions for commercial work and the tenant improvement permits, it speaks to the fact that businesses continue to reinvest in Wilsonville. And it's a very steady stream, somewhere in the neighborhood of between 200 and 300 new permits every year are
On remodels,
from
right.
TIs or remodels or additions for commercial work.
Okay.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. Mr. Carlson, you indicate unless there is a significant uptick, in permits, so what is significant? If Coffee Creek moves forward, the council has moved to invest in getting the infrastructure built there for the primary road system, and I know that there are background discussions going on with different private sector developers. So would a $20 million industrial development be significant enough to turn that? A 30 million, a 50? I mean, what is this order of magnitude that it would take to make that happen?
I think to get our arms accurately around that without speculating too much, we would have to do a fee analysis, a fee study, and we would embark on that probably sometime in the near future. We haven't even begun to have these conversations yet with the manager. So in my experience, though, having worked in a jurisdiction where there were regularly 40, 50, $60 million projects, it would probably take order of magnitude of something like that cumulatively with projects on a regular basis per year. And we just haven't seen that in the commercial realm.
Mrs. LaGarza.
Thank you. Along the same lines of you spoke of the potential fee increase. Are we starting to, and you mentioned maybe we're just starting to think about studying that, but what is the time frame for that? And then implementation-wise, maybe to study, and then implementation-wise, would it begin right away, or would there be a year grace, period to even get it implemented? So what's kind of the time frame if it were to be determined that fees were going to be increased or needed to be increased?
Sure. So just to boil it all down, in my experience, it typically from the time you decide to do a fee increase and go through the studies and do the outreach with the stakeholders, actually notify the state, and there's a lot of state law that we have to follow. It's about a year-long process before you start realizing the revenue to a particular fund from when you start in on that fee. Now, in some cases, it could be expedited by 6 months, 9 months, but generally it's about a year time frame that you're looking at.
We'd probably shoot for a goal of having the increase as of July 1 next fiscal year.
That's actually quicker than I thought.
A lot of work
Yeah.
to get there.
Thank you.
Of course, this one has really jumped up the list. I think Transit's just really happy that they're off the list, but unfortunately, we did replace it with the building fund, and Dan and Keith and I will be working on this throughout the fiscal year to see what we can come up with for the next budget presentation.
Mr. Amadon.
Yeah, I think this is a good example of how this 5-year forecast can be of use. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers and going from 2016-17 to 2018-19, that massive reserve we had is effectively halved, and a couple more years is gone. So I appreciate you saying we had these huge reserves and we didn't want to increase the fees. I do appreciate that. But I think we need to take volatility into concern and plan ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially when we're looking at something like this. Anyway, that's...
Point well taken. Thank you.
Well, that's our community development and building fund, and we'll move right along to our parks and recreation.
So we'll go into the Parks and Recreation. They have two programs, the General Services, Parks and Recreation, and Parks Maintenance. And we have Mike McCarty here, Director of the Parks and Recreation Department, to add a little context.
Very little. Well, as you can see, I'm Mike McCarty from Parks and Recreation Director. As you can see from General Services and Parks Maintenance, 2% decrease in materials, and the big increase is 24% for salary and benefits, and that relates to an additional full-time staff person and additional seasonal staff, and that directly relates to, we're taking over Piccadilly Park in Villebois, which is a couple acres there. We took over 3 parks, Landover, Willow Creek, Hathaway, about a month ago, and we also took over the water features, which were in Public Works before, over at Marassi and at Town Center. Those are roughly, the way we estimated it, 3 hours per day of full-time staff and another 3 hours per day of seasonal staff. So that does add up, and that's for the biggest increase we have. Decrease in materials, it's 1%, really doesn't relate to that much.
Yeah, we'll go into the matrix you're all familiar with of kind of explaining the actual expenses, and if you have questions, we can go from there. So the current year budget for general services was 1.6 million and 9.2 FTE. The baseline change there of $37,417 represents about a 2% increase, and there's no ad packages within the general services part of Parks and Recreation. And then we'll go into Parks Maintenance next, which has the FTE additions that Mike had mentioned. So Parks and Recreation Maintenance, this is, they have a current year budget of 1.4 million and an 8.25 FTE, and you can see they're transitioning to 10.25 FTE. They have a baseline changes of $29,000, represents about a 2% increase. And then they have their ad package requests, which Mike touched on, which include adding 2 FTEs and relate to the Piccadilly Park utilities, and then a couple of capital outlay items, including a truck and high-pressure steam sprayer and a Ventrac contour deck. Mike might be able to answer what that is exactly. And one of the wild cards with this department in general is the cost of water, in the watering of the parks, which fluctuates in accordance with the climate and the addition of additional parkland. So, but we are anticipating a little bit of a reduction in the water, just in line with more historic trends. So that's where that other various adjustments has gone down a little bit, but we continue to watch the water usage a lot, so.
I want to talk about that sprayer.
Okay. Okay, we have a Weeding Tech high pressure sprayer, which basically kills undesirable plants with a high pressure hot water, and it directly relates to the IPM program, so it has no chemicals or anything in there. Also can
And IPM is an integrated pest management plan, and we've been directed by our city council to use a lot less chemicals and herbicides.
Correct. And this will also take care of algae, gum removal, any kind of, anything we need to clean with high pressure, along with the weeds, which is the biggest thing, because again, it has no chemicals in it at all. And so we thought that was a good buy, especially with the way things are nowadays. So I can answer Ventrac, I can answer Ford 450 swap loader, or any questions you guys might have.
Councilor Stevens.
So what is the contour deck?
It is the contour deck. We have a Ventrac. We have I think it's a 4500 Ventrac machine, which has different attachments. So the contour deck actually expands our mowing radius from like 62 to 82. And it also fluctuates. So when we're mowing the ball fields, not only can we mow more at a quicker pace, it also doesn't scald, or when it goes down on the outfield, let's say, and it'll just take it down to nothing, and it doesn't do that. It fluctuates with the turf. And so again, quicker, better, and we just thought that was a good buy for $7,000.
And just another example of, instead of trying to add more staff, we're thinking about how can we be more efficient with equipment. So that's a conversation we have every year with Public Works and with Parks.
And it's not just ball fields. I mean, I just printed it as a description, but we do it in the parks also, and there's also parks that have the contours that are different, and this will also make those better and quicker. So,
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. So Parks picked up the water features this year, right?
Correct.
And is that a significant driver of these overall numbers? I mean, 2 people, is that, it's not 2 people full-time though.
It's not 2 people full-time, no, but it's a big driver. Like I said, we have, it's 3 hours per day, like I said, as far as full-time, and another 3 hours per day for seasonals. And we have to cover this 7 days a week, and also with the rentals we have, which are going up all the time. We have, the rental revenues are going up. I think we're over like 25 or 30,000 on revenues for rentals. So those seasonal people and full-time people have to cover that 7 days a week. So yeah, it is a big driver with the seasonal, sure.
And
I mean, with the,
let us not forget the regional parks in Villebois that are coming online. That's the biggest driver. I
yeah,
would say.
Piccadilly's this year, and we have another one, I think next year, and then we don't have another one for another 2 years after that, but they're all coming on, and RP 7 and 8 is being built, supposed to start June 1st, so.
So then we have 5 years until those come to us?
Those
right?
2 we do, yes, sir.
Yeah. So our parks are such a significant set of amenities that I think our citizens rely on, value, are part of kind of the ethos that we have here in Wilsonville. How do we plan to not only maintain what we have, but grow that park system in accordance with our master plans that kind of go to what the people seem to be wanting.
I have an idea. How about a council goal? Do you want to cue that up for yourself, Mayor?
I just thought you guys could handle it.
Go for it, Mike.
Well, it's difficult. I mean, it's not a small figure. I mean, when you throw in Boone's Ferry plan and Memorial plan and the overall master plan, it's a big ticket item. So we are looking at different options with the council and city manager and to see how we can do that. But I can tell you the city of Wilsonville, the Parks and Rec here, or the parks in particular, are amazing. I've been in many cities in California, and this is the best parks I've ever seen in my life. So, and people care about them, and council cares about them, which is really cool because a lot of places they're kind of down the totem pole. So hopefully we can figure something out to improve, make more of a river access, because you have access to a river here, which a lot of people don't have, and to make it more accessible viewing-wise and use-wise would be nice, but it, like I said, it's not a small ticket item.
So the reality is, to do anything significant with parks, you're limited to two funding, well, maybe three. SDCs, parks SDCs, grant funds, which can be hit or miss, and general obligation. So that would be an influx of property tax dollars if the city went out for a bond. As you know, the council adopted a set of goals, and one of those was to explore a parks bond, working with the Parks and Rec Board to figure out if we were to do 20 million, 30 million, 40 million, whatever that parameter is, over a 20-year period, what would that cost the average household in Wilsonville? And then you would go through, and we already have the priorities from all the master plans. So we know the universe of all the projects, and we have a general idea about what those would cost. We would fine tune those numbers, and council will make a decision as to whether you want to let the voters vote on that. But that's, in every city, that's the case. To do anything significant with parks, we have Memorial Park Master Plan, we have our General Parks Master Plan, we have the new Boone's Ferry Park Master Plan. So and the athletic fields on Advance Road. I mean, you could go down the list. We have a neighborhood park out in Frog Pond that needs to also be built with city funds. So if I had to guess, I'd say it's about $60 million, and some of that would be funded through SDCs and perhaps some grants. But the bulk of that, if you're going to do it, is going to happen because the voters say they want more. So access to the river, athletic fields are two things that we hear about a lot in our community survey. So that'll be an ongoing dialogue with the city council and the parks. Also, to go with that would be an analysis of, okay, if you built all this and the people said they want it and they pay for it, don't go out and ask them if you don't know how you're going to maintain it. So that would be part of the analysis would be, if they said yes, what would that cost in terms of annual maintenance? Because it's like Benjamin Franklin said, it's cheaper to build 2 chimneys than to maintain 1. So we're constantly aware of what those maintenance costs are.
And staff is
Dwight
working
for
on
sure
that
would
with.
have been so proud of me with that Benjamin.
I know he would, yeah.
With the assistant city manager, we're working on a plan to make sure we put in the cost of maintaining not just the improvements the city manager's talking about, but also just Villwa. What it will take in the next 5 years to make sure we keep up with the status that we've kind of put out there right now, which is it's a really nice park system, and we don't want to deter that or put that down and make it less than it is. So we're putting that plan together too.
Mrs. LaGarza.
Thank you. I just had a quick question about the utility services, because it looks like in the budget that those are actually going down, and I think maybe Keith may have mentioned that. And I wondered, you kind of mentioned water services. Is it electric? What's all included in the utility service, and what's actually going down? And I was wondering, with the new splash or the new water features, are we not paying for the water out of this budget for those features?
Well, the water I'm talking about is generally the water for irrigation, and I think we would do a little bit of a trend analysis, and I think we spiked through some hot years a couple years ago, but overall I think we got ahead of ourselves on the budget in terms of excess capacity for irrigation, so we kind of dialed it back. That's kind of what happened to the utilities. It's primarily irrigation. The water feature, and I might be able to answer this a little bit better in terms of is it primarily recyclable water, or?
It is. It recycles through, just like a pool does. I mean, you have to keep the chlorine levels right and, the acid levels right and everything else, but it just recycles through. And that's basically what the staff is doing that we talked about earlier, is they're down in the hole there, and you have to have somebody above the hole to make sure everything's safe, but they're checking levels to make sure everything's good to go for the citizens.
As we move forward, also, we are looking at using well water, possibly. We have a well that we could use for Memorial Park. It would cost some money, but we would do some analysis about what would it cost to extend the line. Some cities are looking at gray water use for watering parks, and, some people get nervous about that, but I think the way we treat our effluent is probably at a higher level than a lot of cities. So we'll constantly be looking at ways we can be more efficient and save money for the taxpayers.
Fantastic. That answers my question.
Thank you.
So I think that's all for Mike.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Run when you can.
Next up will be the library, and I think we have Pat Duke here, our library director, will come up and add a little bit of context to the overall budget of the library.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pat Duke, Library Director. Today, I just want to talk a little bit about what we are proud of over the last year, and talk a little about what we do as part of our job. A 2018 a community survey showed that 96% of residents essentially liked the services that we provide. They were excellent or good services provided by the library services. And what that means is that we focus on our face-to-face connections with our residences, circulation, reference, things like that. We focus on our programs that we provide for all age. Our collection, of course, of books and movies and ebooks and things like that. And also our building and how people feel within our building and how does it work for them. In July of 2018, we connected a remodel of the library, and we focused on opening up the library central area of the library. We opened access to our children's patio for parents. We moved around our collection a bit, including our teens, which opened up our teen area that has frankly created a 40% increase in circulation of teens within the library. We also improved our Wi-Fi within the building. Another things we're focusing on are our collection, and of course that is the pistol, the books and the other material in the library, as well as the ebooks and downloadable audiobooks and things like that, where the collection, physical collection is not increasing. It's running off, moving off a little bit. Our ebooks and our downloadable audios are up by 30% over last year. So within the budget, when you look at online collection budget, which is pretty flat, what we're actually doing within that is moving the funds from books over to ebooks and downloadable audio and things like that. Our programs, one of the things we've done over the past year or so is we're collaborating with Westland Public Library to create services for the Westland Wilsonville School District so that we can serve all of the students within the district in a consistent way. And we do things like have a join up newsletter for the teachers in the school district, talking about ways that we can help for the kids. We also had 25,000 people attend programs this year. About 90% of that is actually kids programs. And so that's story time, and that's baby programs and things like that. But of course, as we talk, there are about 120 adults in McMenamins right now at a history pub event that is going on at this moment. Summer reading is coming up, and we have programs for both kids and teens and adults, and probably a total around 3,000 people who will attend or register into those programs this summer. For the kids, about half of the kids who are in the program will finish the program. That's about 1,200 children who will finish the program this summer. And then finally, we have outreach services where we're going to visit preschool classes. We attend school events. We recently have created English conversation classes and groups for people to learn English and to practice their English. And of course, we are registering people, 800 kids for Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. And we've had about 1,200 kids finish that program. So we're very happy about the things that we're able to accomplish in the year. All of those items that you're seeing have come from the 2014-2019 strategic plan that we work off of. And we have an ad package in this budget to refresh our strategic plan for the library for the next 3 or 5 years. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. I see in the budget indicated we had somewhat of a circulation dip over the last couple of years, and you're projecting that that's going to be growing again. Can you comment on that for us?
We are, as part of the remodel and as well, if you think of a couple of pieces, one is the remodel. We have deleted a good chunk of our collections within the building, the physical items, in order to make them more so that people can get access to the items that they're interested in and can use them. We're also bringing a lot of the items are off of the stacks and bringing them into the central area that we've opened on the tables and things like that so they can see them. We are hoping that that is going to increase that piece of the collection. Circulation. Also, ebooks will continue to increase as we are moving people over to, and people are moving over to downloading online use of the circulation. So those things, I believe, will help to increase circulation over time.
Councilor Stevens?
So I would just say that, in my opinion, the library is comparable to our parks. in terms of an amenity that people in Wilsonville really desire, that they value, and that I think is a direct correlation to the reason we get such high marks on our survey that we do every couple of years in terms of quality of life here. Would you recommend Wilsonville as a place to move to, those kinds of things? Do you see yourself staying here? Because the library is so much more than a place that you check out a book or an ebook or, music. It's the programming that happens there, and it's the staffing that happens there that's so important. It's really a community center in a lot of aspects. 25,000 people attending, and mostly kids, which you're engaging those and building those good habits and engaging those kids in some really positive activities. So, I think, again, it's something that just as the people who live here value those parks, they value this library. And it wouldn't happen without the funding that's required to do it, and then the staffing that's such high quality. So I appreciate the work you and your staff do there a lot.
Thank you.
I'm there 5 times a week.
And I like the interaction with
today.
the schools, because I think my kids' first tour of the library was when they were at Valley Christian Preschool. So, and they've done it every point beyond that. So I think that interaction with the schools has made it appealing to children as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mrs. LaGarza.
Just a quick question that I may have missed in your presentation. The repairs and maintenance line item, it appears pretty consistent throughout the years, and then this year it's going down quite a bit. Can you just explain why that is?
That's the reclassification of the janitorial services, once again. That was about $41,000.
Perfect, thanks.
And then they had 2 ad packages. The consultant for the 5-year strategic plan, $50,000, and an acquisition for a cell phone tower in the library.
Yeah.
And that's the library. I think we can move forward.
Mayor Knapp.
Oh.
We're going to buy our own cell phone tower? I thought that the companies paid us to locate their tower on our property.
So this is in order to increase the phone access within the building. It's in a bit of a hole, and we consistently have a poor connection to people's phones. A lot of the services that people use within the building are online. If someone these days are using the collection, the catalog, they are, a lot of times they're using a phone. They need a reliable connection to their phones. And so, yeah,
Helps with the Wi-Fi too.
It also, yes. And previously we increased Wi-Fi over within the building. And this is along this.
But our commercial providers, this is not of interest to them?
No.
Andy can answer the technical questions.
Right.
It's not as much a tower as a repeater, because the library is kind of in a hole. It'll help bring the signals from the 4 major carriers down and then into the different pieces of the library. The library has it's very spread out and makes it for a better signal throughout the
It's
the
a
building.
signal booster is what it is.
Essentially, yes.
It's a repeater booster. Thank you.
That's it?
So now we'll move on to our law enforcement. We have the program areas of public safety and municipal court. And we will bring our chief with us and the assistant city manager.
160.
Good evening, everyone. Robert Werps here, Chief of Police for Wilsonville Police. We'll go over some basics here just so everybody's familiar. There's 20 FT as we currently, includes myself, 3 supervisors, a detective, a school resource officer, a motorcycle officer, 1 traffic enforcement car, 1 community service officer, and then 11 officers. In 2018, we saw the calls go up about nearly 7%. That's not a big surprise. That kind of matches our increase in population we've seen. And on top of investigating major crimes and responding to calls 24 hours a day, we know that it's super important to the community here and to me that we get out and interact with the community. So we've worked really hard at that, not only on the social media platforms, but also in participating and continue to participate in bicycle patrols, Coffee with a Cop, Kona with a Cop. We participate in a lot of really positive events that are great and fun. National Night Out's a big one of those. And another fun opportunity we had was with Wood Middle School. We found out they had a bicycle class they actually offer, and they had a final city ride, and our police officers joined them on the bikes. I went too. It was a really fun experience. I just point out some of those things because that's kind of the above and beyond stuff that we really enjoy doing, and so does the community likes it a lot too.
Okay, so I'll get into this in a minute, but there is one question that came up from Councilor Akval, and so I just want to make note on page 162 in your budget document, and we'll get into this slide. There was an error, and it says under forecast of 2020, if you look down, it says calls per deputy. It says 700. That should say 754. So it's just an error in the calculation on our part. So I apologize for that. But if you want to make that change, it was a good catch by Councilor Akval. So on this slide, what is not included in your budget document, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail here, but is a 0.5 FTE for a additional detective position. So currently the city has 1 detective here in Wilsonville, and I'll let Chief Werps talk a little bit about the need for this detective. But what we're asking for is a change, an increase in FTE, but not an increase in terms of resources. We believe that we've got the money within the existing law enforcement budget to be able to support a 0.5 FTE. That would be essentially for 6 months of this year. And the reason for that being is that the way our contract works with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office is that at the point that we ask for additional personnel, it takes several months, I think approximately 8 months, from the time that we ask for that additional personnel and we have to start paying for that person until we actually see that person out here in Wilsonville. And there's a number of reasons for that, and Chief Werps can kind of get into that. But the reason why we're asking for a 0.5, which is actually 6 months to be a full detective position, but 0.5 is only for 6 months of this next fiscal year. And so we're asking to fund that. We believe we've already got the resources within the existing budget to be able to handle that expense. But that would allow us then 8 months into the next fiscal year to be able to get somebody on board. So you have to kind of pay in advance, if you will, before you actually see the body actually out here on the street. Do you want to talk a little bit about the rest of this?
I'll start with the rationale for the addition. So I tried to use a few metrics to measure that, but if we looked at a statewide analysis of similar sized cities, and on average they have about 3.5 detectives, including a dedicated supervisor. When I looked at the sheriff's office, an average detective at any snapshot's managing about 5 cases. Our detective here has about 9. The sheriff's office detective annually will probably do about 19, and ours is climbing to 29. So he's a really hard worker. He's doing a great job managing it, but we're asking a lot of him for very serious crimes. These include child abuse and major sex crimes, and these require long-term management, search warrants. These are just kind of like our advanced police work that just requires a lot more time, interview techniques and things like that. And as we're really just limited to serious person crimes. So things like fraud, major theft rings, serial theft, things of that nature are fallen to our patrol deputies to manage, which is doable, but it's constantly interrupted by the calls for service we get, so it doesn't run quite as smoothly. That's my rationale there. In terms of the ramp-up cost, because that usually gets a lot of questions, just for information, the actual time when we did a study of when a person drops off their application to becoming a full-fledged police officer, it's 18 months for us to make that happen. This cost is only a one-time thing for the city, so replacing a detective won't incur this again. It's just once. And this also doesn't account for us on the county side. We have to account for people failing the program, both on the initial hiring, that they don't make the program, or even in detectives where they don't make the program, none of which the city has, none of those burdens are incurred by the city.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. Unless I'm not understanding, it seems like another half FTE should show in the budget. Am I not looking in the right place in the book?
This decision was made after we did the budget
All right,
document
so this is an
itself.
update to what's
Yes.
in the book.
Additional request to what was published in the
So
budget.
if this is the Budget Committee's pleasure, you will need to request an FTE increase of 0.5
Yeah,
during the adoption
adoption of
process,
some kind, yeah.
approval process.
Okay.
So basically, that's a pretty status quo as far as police safety. Our police contract goes. The only increase that we're seeing is in the contract. And as they have stated, the 0.5 increase can be absorbed in the amount of money that we do have budgeted this fiscal year. So the ending budget would be about $5.3 million with an FTE of 20.5.
So I'm looking at page 162 where we talk about officers per thousand population. How do we compare to other cities of comparable size on that?
Can we preface that by saying that this is my least favorite metric in the world?
Yeah, there's
Okay, that's fine, Brian, but
Go ahead and answer.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of metrics we can use. And what I find challenging is how much weight to give the officers per thousand, or our response time to calls, or the increase in calls, or the population. And so a discussion we've just been having is about really exploring bringing in a consulting firm that can really dig down into all this data and weight it correctly and map out for us where we should be and where we should be headed. And so I don't want to get too fixed on a particular matrix.
It's an old metric. So what I would say is, how many officers do you need? What are you trying to do with your police department?
yes.
Heavily, community policing is very labor intensive. So there's a fine line between, say, maybe Lake Oswego, what they do with their police department, and I don't know, Woodburn or whatever. There's different issues going on in those communities. They have different demographics. They have different crime statistics. There's different geography. We have I-5, so we've added a traffic officer to be responsive to some of the concerns that we've heard. We hear a lot of complaints from citizens about speeding in the neighborhood. So we've recently developed a traffic safety team, and we also added that traffic unit. So I really do want to dig into, ICMA does a really good job of assessing what your community needs, so it's based on your individual kind of profile. So I'll work with the chief and Ms. Troha, and we will put together a study and profile. We'll bring that back to the budget committee, and it'll have a staffing plan. Hopefully for the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be able to lay out what we think we need.
That would be helpful, yes.
We definitely need to add this detective, because I'm convinced that we are falling behind in terms of the caseload. And we don't want to burn out the one great detective that we have. We want to keep him for as long as we can.
Okay.
Any other questions on our police? Okay, well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our last program is our municipal court. This is a pretty small program overall. We have a baseline charge change of about $8,000, and that's due just to the personnel services. We have a proposed budget of $234,000 and 1.65 FTE, which includes our municipal court judge as well as our court clerks. Any questions? Okay. So the last thing that we have here is the 5-year forecast for the general fund. And I think we kind of talked about this before, but one of the things that I got to sit in on all of the budget meetings this year. It was the first time in a couple of years that I had that opportunity. And while you saw a request approved for 2 FTEs, just about every program requested an additional personnel. And those were very tough decisions, I know, for a city manager to have to weed through all of that. So what I did this fiscal year, which is kind of different from what we've done in the past, is that I gave everybody something throughout this 5-year program, just to see what it really would look like. And as you would expect, we see our fund balance take a dive. Obviously, the revenue line does not, meet up with our expense line. In fiscal year 23-24, you kind of see a sharp incline in the revenues, and that's because that's when we anticipate the year 2000 urban renewal district closing, and that will infuse about $785,000 in property tax revenues. And what we don't see in year 25-26, we are actually expecting the West Side Urban Renewal District to close, and that will bring in an additional $1 million in property taxes. So, one thing to keep in mind, this is just looking out, gathering all the information we can, and this is how we look at how it would be. But once again, this is carefully reviewed at every budget process, and we would have to have the funding on hand before we would actually bring additional FTE requests. But they're coming. Everybody is, all the growth in the city is catching up with everyone. And I think we've done a great job using our different software programs and different technologies, trying to keep up with it. But at some point in time, we will see additional personnel will be needed. And that is the end of the city's presentation, and I will turn it back.
Councilor Stevens.
Oh, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Could you please go back to that slide you just had up? Thanks. So how does the payment from the Tualatin Valley Water District play into this forecast?
It does not. Right now, we're capturing those funds in the,
Water fund.
actually in the Water Capital Fund,
Okay.
just because nobody looks for it there. And so we're kind of keeping it until we know what we want to spend it on, because I know how these engineers, they see money, they'll start spending it. So we did a pretty good job of hiding it.
That money's not being spent until council gives us direction.
Correct. So we are just gathering that it's not in the general fund at all.
But that money's unrestricted. It could go to general fund, it could go to rate stabilization for the water fund, it could go to build a trail along the Willamette. There's no restrictions. So we did present to council, I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, some ideas.
I remember that.
And you all looked at them and said, yeah, that's great. We'll just wait until we get the money. So we're just banking the money right now.
So you're getting some payments now, but then there's going to be,
We get 170,000-ish
payment.
a year until 2026 or 2027.
25, 26?
174,000.
Yeah, and then we get a balloon payment of, I think, 15 million.
15 million, right. And that's actually, that fiscal year is off this chart too, isn't it? So
Yes.
that's why it wouldn't be showing up. So the 170 million, or 170,000 a year is going
To the water
to
fund.
the water fund.
Yeah.
It's got its own line item in the water fund.
And
It's just being
then-
banked.
But it's not too far from here that you're going to have to deal with that in this 5-year forecast.
Correct.
I was saying.
Yeah, and when we look at the strategic plan, we are playing with the idea of maybe trying to go out 10 years, and that would capture some of these,
Oh, yeah.
other things that we
Anomalies.
know are
It's like an
coming.
anomaly,
But
yeah. That's a real blip,
Yeah.
though, because that's just a one-time thing, but it is a significant
Correct.
blip. So, okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, if we're done with our questions. Oh, no, almost
Are we done with
made
our
it.
questions?
Almost made it.
So looking at the budget overall, the community development really is where some of our concern kind of carries forward. It kind of seems to me to emphasize how important it is that we continue our economic development efforts that would bring private sector investment in Coffee Creek and in Frog Pond and eventually in Basalt Creek. We have people on staff that are continuously working on those things. I know Jordan is here, and that is kind of behind the scenes, I guess, for a lot of people, but I think it is going to matter over time as to how we move these projects forward. So I guess I'm just kind of calling that out as a maybe not so visible thing, but something that over time will have a significant effect on our budget numbers and what these look like. So I'm just encouraging people to be aware of that and know that there's a lot of activity happening. The council voted to do the necessary to fund the Garden Acres Road construction, which then prepares Coffee Creek to the point that we believe we will see some serious private sector proposals. I know that in my talks I have with other mayors and in other places, we talk about the $800 million that we have seen in private sector investment in this community in the last decade, in the last 10 years. Pretty significant for a town of 25,000. I think that we have excellent opportunity to build on that as we go forward. So I'm just hoping that we will continue those efforts. At the same time, we're worrying about the budgeting on the back end. I think we have to kind of take an expansive view and look where are the opportunities as we move forward. And I hope we will continue to try to capture those opportunities as we move forward. So thank you for indulging me.
No problem.
Any other questions to staff? Okay. If there's no further questions of staff, I now ask the committee for a motion to approve the fiscal year 2019-2020 proposed budget. With a motion and second, we can then proceed with the discussion of the budget presented.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the 2019-20 budget as amended in the total amount of $212,573,216 and levying the full amount of the city general tax rate of 2.5206 cents.
I'll second. Do we need to
to
amend
request
it?
do we have to do an amendment first to
For
the,
the-
As amended.
As amended?
As amended?
as amended? Okay.
It does include,
The amendment for the 0.5 of
Enforcement
the
thing.
detective. Okay, we got that? Then I'll second.
So second, all right. So any discussions amongst ourselves?
A lot of work.
Work,
How about a comment?
A lot of work.
A lot of work. Yeah.
Mayor Knapp.
Thank you. The budget exercise is an important piece of our kind of oversight of the whole city operations. But there's for all of the specificity of the dollars, this is in some ways a statement of our values and our policies as to what we want the community to be and where we place value in the programs that are part of that whole thing. So just to the Budget Committee, I hope you look at it that way. I don't think that we should be second guessing on particular small dollar amounts. I think it's the policies that have the largest value to the committee and to the community when we look forward to that. Staff has done a huge amount of work, as they do every year, and we have a track record of benefiting from very high quality professional work by our staff, which I'm very grateful for the long-term efforts that have gone in and the stability we've had. I'm aware that that's not necessarily true in every other city in our state, in our region. So yes, I think that is important to recognize also. And I also know from a period of time, not being a trained accountant or, a numbers guy really, that one of the things that I think we have to recognize is when we look at some of these long-term trends and are concerned about them, the fact that we are recognizing them now and are concerned about them now allows us to discern where we can make modest changes that over time will have compound effects and will affect those long-term trends. We're not looking at any kind of a sudden crisis situation. There's no reason we need to wait to a sudden crisis before we start to kind of bend the curve a little bit. And again, I think our track record is that we have done that successfully, and I'm optimistic that we will be able to do that, going forward also, and balance those concerns with ways to change our policies in modest ways to try to start to affect those things that need to be affected. So it's a perception kind of a thing, I guess, is part of what I'm saying.
I also find it very reassuring that Brian and staff here were able to respond to our off-the-wall questions. I do not feel as though we caught them daydreaming at the switch. I mean, they knew whether silly things like that credit card thing. You guys have been thinking about it. So that's very reassuring for me that you guys are thinking about it, or at least you sound like you are.
Councilor Stevens.
Thank you. So I agree with both those comments. I think this staff and the employees that work for the city know this stuff so well, and then we come in, a couple times a year, and even council, and that's when you have great staff, you get those questions answered. And when they don't know, they say, I don't know, but we'll get back to you. So you started off tonight answering the questions that were asked at our last meeting, so that's fantastic. But I think what you were, if I can just reiterate what you were saying, Mayor Knapp, is that what makes the city work so well is that we're proactive instead of reactive. And a perfect case in point tonight was just that we're getting the heads up, not a red flag, but a heads up on the building department, and that there's some concern there. So staff is aware, made the budget committee aware, council becomes aware, and everything is so transparent, and that's what's really makes everything work so well. And then there's a reality check there. You do the study, this is what's happening, so how do we deal with it in the best way possible? A few years ago, it was transit. We got lucky with the House bill. But there's always going to be those issues. And if we just face them head on, it just makes it work better rather than putting them off till that, we don't want to raise fees or anything, and then we pay for it later. It's just, you need to be able to, we pay for it more later because you lose infrastructure, quality, parks, all those kinds of things that people value here. So I really appreciate the work you've done on this. I know it's kind of hard to crunch all those numbers. It becomes sort of mesmerizing, but it's a necessary task we all need to take seriously. Thank you.
What I appreciate is, and what lets me sleep at night, is that I believe city staff, from the top down, manages the city's resources very well. We aren't, as a budget committee, we aren't in a contentious environment where we're fighting with the city staff over the money that's being spent. So you guys are adhering to the fiduciary duty that you have to manage someone else's money. I think you do a very good job. I understand the amount of work that goes into this, and I appreciate your efforts. I also like the format that we've adhered to the last several years that makes it more understandable. I understand the book has to be the book because we have to play by the rules, but the presentations help clarify the differences in my mind. So I appreciate that work. So we have a motion, a seconded motion. Do we need to reread the motion?
I think we're good.
We're good? It's in the record? All right. All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 0. This meeting then is adjourned, and after a short bio break, we will move on to the urban renewal meeting. All right.